Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Lunch and Learn, a partnership series between the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights and the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. My name is Kyla Hannington, and I'm the Public Outreach and Engagement Division Manager with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights, the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. With me today as co-hosts are Tiana Davis, the Outreach Specialist with the Office of Human Rights, and Dr. Audrey Lau, the Adult and Senior Programming Specialist with the Library System. Lunch and Learn debuted in the summer of 2024, and we have been privileged to have extraordinary guests join us. And today it is really, truly an honor to be here with W. Ralph Eubanks in conversation about his beautiful new book, When Is Darkness on the Delta? How America's Richest Soil Became Its Poorest Land. W. Ralph Eubanks is a faculty fellow and writer in residence at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture at the University of Mississippi. He is the author of A Place Like Mississippi, A Journey Through a Real and Imagined Literary Landscape, as well as two other works of nonfiction, Ever is a Long Time, and The House at the End of the Road. He is a writer and an essayist whose work focuses on race, identity, and the American South, and his writing has appeared in Vanity Fair, The American Scholar, The Georgia Review, and The New Yorker. He is a 2007 Guggenheim Fellow, a 2021 to 2022 Harvard Radcliffe Institute Fellow, and the recipient of a 2023 Mississippi Governor's Arts Award for Excellence in Literature, and in recognition of his role as a cultural ambassador for the state of Mississippi. Wow. Ralph, it is wonderful to have you back.
Oh, it's great to be back. Thank you for having me here today.
We are delighted, and we were hoping that you could just get us started by talking to viewers who haven't had a chance to read yet about a little bit about this book and just provide an introduction.
Yes, so I came back to Mississippi 10 years ago to teach at Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi. And before I came back to Millsaps, I'd done a piece for Wired magazine on the lack of broadband access in Mississippi, but more particularly in the Delta. It's kind of its poorest region of the state. But when I got back to Mississippi 10 years ago, I found myself in a lot of elite spaces in Mississippi that I would not have found myself in before. I had people saying things to me about the Delta, for example, that, if Mississippi didn't have the Delta, it would rank 25th in the nation. And I began to fact check some of those assertions that people were making to me. And then I started going to the Delta regularly and coming to the recognition that here I was in the poorest state in the Union, living in Belhaven, teaching at this very elite liberal arts college, visiting friends in Oxford, and I never saw a poor person. Mm-hmm. So I mean, going to the Delta was my way of trying to get in touch with this other side of Mississippi that I was not experiencing, and that people were decrying in my presence as if it was a safe thing for them to do. So I started going to the Delta regularly. I started writing about it. I actually, while I was at Millsaps, I actually did a presentation on some of the things that I had found in the Delta that I'd been thinking about, which became a piece that I wrote for the Oxford American, The Dimming Mystique of Milestone. And that's really the beginning of this book. But in between, I was having a hard time kind of figuring out how to write this book, because my family left the Delta the year before I was born in 1956, in the wake of the Emmett Till murder. And there was this lingering question I had is, am I the person to tell the story of the Delta? My family left. As a friend of mine said, if they had not left and I'd grown up in the Delta, I would look at the world very differently. And then in the middle of that, I get approached to write A Place Like Mississippi. So I put this book aside. I turned to A Place Like Mississippi. And if you look at that book, the longest chapter in there is on the Delta, because you can see that that's very much on my mind. But it was through writing that book and kind of looking at kind of the literary heritage of Mississippi that I began to find my voice to write this book. Because one of the things that my editor, Will McKay, asked me on that book, I was trying to write myself out of it in a lot of ways. He says, well, I like what you're doing here, here, and here, but where are you? And I think that was the same thing I was doing with the original drafts of When It's Darkness on the Delta. I was keeping my personal perspective out of it. I was trying to write from this omniscient historical perspective, and it was not ringing true. So writing a place like Mississippi kind of gave me the license to kind of go in a lot more personally into this book and to give what was it that I'm kind of feeling about this place? What is it that I'm seeing about this place? And why is this place so important, not just to Mississippi, but to the country? I'm just going to read a little bit from, that gives people who are listening today, that a sense of how I feel about this place. And this is from chapter 14, which is called Resilience and Salvation in the Delta, where I profile two people, John Ware, who is a former sharecropper who grew up on a plantation outside of Ruleville, and Ollie Morganfield, who is the nephew of Muddy Waters, and who is this great naturalist, environmentalist in the Delta. So these two men with very different experiences, but they tell me very important things about the Delta itself. And this is kind of what I realized during this time. During my time exploring this great alluvial plain, I have come to think of the Mississippi Delta as my own Sargasso Sea, a liminal space of madness where my thoughts are sometimes lost between the darkness and intermittent light that can be found in this land's glowing sunsets. The Sargasso Sea, surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean, is also the only sea that exists without shores. It is an extended region surrounded by ocean. When I look at the Delta, that is what I see: people unmoored and adrift at sea, though they live on a great expanse of land with the richest soil in North America, from the farm cooperatives of Mileston to the plantations and casinos of Tunica. It is a place adrift between what some see as the glories of its past and the tragic poverty and abandonment of the present. I've come to realize that to understand the Delta, you must experience it not just through the history and rhythm of the blues, but through the struggles and stories that created the music. The blues isn't just about pain. Inside those songs are hidden cries for freedom and liberation. And the only way to connect with the spirit of those ideas is to connect with the land and the people. So that is really kind of my way of kind of connecting with the land and the people. And part of that was also for me moving to Clarksdale, Mississippi for 4 months, embedding myself there, looking at blues tourism. How does it operate here? And then going out to different places in the Delta and kind of living in the Delta, because when you live in a place that is poor, poverty is no longer an abstraction. So kind of living there was a big part of it for me. And then exploring it kind of beyond the archive itself, beyond a physical archive, but using the landscape itself as an archive, which is why I took so many photographs of the place. There's a whole photo section of the book of a lot of those photographs, because part of the time that I'm writing this book, I am also in Cambridge, Massachusetts on a fellowship at the Radcliffe Institute. So I go to Mississippi, I spend some time interviewing, photographing, walking the fields. And then later on in the summer, I'm living in Clarksdale, biking east and west every Sunday, looking at some different land and meeting people along the way, because they're thinking, who's this crazy guy riding a bicycle through the Delta? And you stop and talk to people and they tell you stories. Going to a picnic in Glen Allen, Mississippi, where all the people who once worked there, lived and worked there as part of really the plantation economy, how they've all left, but they all come back once a year for this picnic. And really kind of experiencing this place as closely and as intimately as I can, and trying to get some of that experience down on the page, not from that kind of omniscient point of view that I started with, but from this place of intimacy, love, but also exile. trying to maintain some distance from this. So I always tell people that I'm writing about Mississippi from this perspective of exile. I am from the place, but I try to maintain a distance from it so that otherwise I become too much a part of it and I don't see it clearly.
Mm-hmm.
So,
thank you for that. I can I jump in? Is that okay?
yes,
I don't want
absolutely.
to. Okay. I just, as you were talking and the section that you read, it reminded me of a part, and I made a note, and I'm just going to read the note because I want to get the language correct. But you write at one point, because this book to me was so much about love for the Delta, and you write at one point that poverty had simply become so ingrained into my idea of the landscape of the Mississippi Delta that I didn't even see it. I saw only the beauty of the place and none of the pain that had shaped it. And I really appreciated this. I wrote about Mississippi once, and I did so with the intention to really focus on the beauty because I felt that outsiders sometimes only talk about the bad stuff. And so I had wanted to be like, hold on just a moment, And I think that what I appreciate so much about this work, and your other, we've had you before. I've been so lucky to get to talk to you at other times about Mississippi, is that you, to me, really do both. That you can love Mississippi and not be reductive about it, and you see it fully. And to me, this is such an image of real love, right? If you can think about our loved ones, we see them fully as their full selves, and that is all of them, good and bad, and love them either not necessarily in spite of that, but because of their fullness. And that's really how I see you looking at Mississippi. And I was wondering, like just how that is. Like, I guess I just want to communicate to you how well this has come across on the page.
Well, thank you. I mean, and I that was really my intention, was to allow that to come across. I'm glad that it did, but I also wanted people to I kind of write about this idea of the veiled mirror, that there's so much about this that we don't see because we keep a veil over it, and then we don't lift it up. But if we look at places like the Delta, we don't just see the South, we see America. And I think it is so often it is our unwillingness to see how this connects to the rest of the country. We will want to put the Delta in this spot of other within a region, other within the South. I mean, I think James Cobb famously and accurately did call it the most southern place on earth. But I also think that idea of it being the most southern place on earth has allowed a lot of people to discount its connection to the rest of the country, even though Cobb is trying in that book to get his readers to see how this is connected to the rest of the country. So in a lot of ways, Jim Cobb's perspective on that is I'm trying to continue what he's saying at the end of that is the rest of the country becoming the Delta writ large. That's the question at the end. And that's exactly what I'm really looking at here. I mean, I tell people I was looking at three big questions. What are the policy, political, and cultural issues that have disadvantaged the people of the Mississippi Delta? What are the myths that keep us from seeing them? And what role does race play in shaping that mythology? Those were the things that I was trying to do with this book. And and that was one of the things I think was holding me back. I hadn't quite figured out, well, what are the questions that I should be asking? And I also felt, well, maybe I should be providing the solutions. And it's like, no, I'm not a policy person, but I do know the questions that perhaps could be asked. And that's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get to the questions that should be asked. I won't know the answers, but I also hope that really motivates policymakers, economists, and others, in the philanthropic sector in particular, to begin to think about what it is that we should be doing with places like the Delta and other places like it, like Appalachia, which I visit at the end of the book. Thinking about there are all these places of deep disadvantage around the country. I would say, when I look at Anacostia in my city of Washington, D.C., I see the Delta.
Yeah.
So it's not that disconnected. I mean, I was just to the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and I was asked about I was saying, gosh, how long it's taken to recover from Katrina. I said took much longer to recover from Katrina than it did from Camille, which is part of my living memory. And this young man who just moved there said, well, why is that? I said there was a lot more federal aid after Camille that made that recovery happen a lot faster.
Mhm.
That happened after Katrina. I said, and the thing that I've noticed is that the working class areas of the Gulf Coast that I remember as a child are not there. I spoke at this place called 100 Men Hall in Bay St. Louis, which was a Black mutual aid society. That is no longer a Black neighborhood. It is, that idea of its place there is being maintained. But after Katrina, that neighborhood gentrifies. It changes. So it's this idea of how inequality begins to creep into places without our even recognizing it.
I really appreciate it. And I also really appreciate what you've just said here, and also that I think the book highlights, and something that I wanted to talk about. And then I'm going to hand it over to Audrey and Taylor, I promise. Of this, there's a Jacqueline Trimble poem, that wonderful poem, Everyone in America Hate the South, I think. And it's just like how, and I want to just, this is so perfect. And I feel like you've touched this, that like I meet people who would tell you that they are people who care deeply about inequality, and they care about poverty, and they care about people, but they look down on Mississippi. They don't care about Mississippi or Appalachia. And you can hear them talk about these regions in a disparaging way, at the same time that their self-identity would be somebody who cares about these systemic issues. And so I just see the way that Mississippi is like the scapegoat for America's ills. And I am so grateful that you're...
Well, I was in conversation with Steve Yarborough in Boston a couple weeks ago. And one of the things that Steve says that, he says, I was going to a party in Roxbury, and someone said, oh, I would never go there. And he said, this is someone who is, a very prominent New England writer who you think, thinks all the right ways, yet is so disparaging about this place, because there is this idea. It's almost like Roxbury is Mississippi.
Yeah.
And we have to begin to reckon with that. And that's one of the things that I found. There was so much here that I had to reckon with. I had to reckon with the mythology of the place, but I also had to reckon with my own mythology about it. And I think that was, and several of my friends who were reading this were really encouraging me to do that. So you have to go and do that in order for, this to really feel as if it's something that someone should connect with. And that's what I found myself doing, connecting with my own ideas about the blues, my own connection with the Delta landscape itself, realizing that I didn't always see poverty on that landscape, that poverty was part of the landscape. And it became invisible. And that is by design. As Matthew Desmond famously says, poverty is a policy choice. And once you begin to recognize that we have made poverty a policy choice, the way you look at things is different. And that's exactly what happened to me. I'm looking at things very differently now that I see that.
Thank you.
In one chapter, the chapter about the blues, you talk about how sharecroppers, how that whole system sort of mirrors slavery in its oppression, right? But how it's sort of hand waved away as blues tourism. And then you get a great example of, is it the Shack Up Inn, which
Yes.
I Googled, and it's ridiculous. It's ludicrous in like everything they're trying to do with it. But can you talk a bit more about how those lines are blurred, sort of to not hide, but ignore the uglier past of slavery, while sharecropping still has its ugly history?
Yeah, I think we want to talk about authenticity in the blues. And authenticity in the blues means those sharecropper shacks, which really don't exist very much on the natural landscape of the Delta anymore. There's a pair of them that I've been photographing for the last 10 years. And I think I've found maybe 2 others along the way. A group of them that I had photographed have now since been burned down. So we're kind of destroying evidence of that on the landscape. It's not malicious, but it's just that people think, well, we don't really need that there. But what I do see with the way that we're kind of we're connecting this poverty and authenticity without recognizing what led to that poverty, that led to the music. So we're, it's, the joke that I make about this, and I'm halfway serious, is that, yeah, everyone wants to come to Clarksdale, Mississippi to experience the blues and shake a tail feather. I like to shake a tail feather as much as the next guy, but we really do need to kind of probe what led to that building being there. And, I spoke with the writer Linda Williams Jackson, who says, kind of fetishizing these shacks. She said, I grew up in one of those shacks. And it's not somewhere you really want to be. He said, you don't know, there are all kinds of critters and things that come up under it. They're only insulated by newspaper. It's not pretty. And then, having been at the shack I've been when a group of European tourists were there and having them tell me how authentic it is, that's what really got me. Is that, oh my goodness, people actually do believe this is the way people lived out here, not realizing this, that we put this other layer on it. And we have forgotten about that kind of in our, just trying to reduce the blues to a backbeat and a bass line. We have gotten away from the pain that created it, as well as, I would argue, the complexity of blues music itself. These people were not just out there rhyming. They were playing the role of sociologists, psychologists. This is a very important work that these people are doing. And we ignore that at our peril, I think.
One of the things I really appreciated when you wrote, and, Tiana talking about Clarksdale, I was one of those tourists once. I went to the crossroads. I didn't sell my soul, but, there's that whole mythology of Clarksdale and everything. But I guess one of the things I was curious about when you were writing this, you talk about in the introduction being a person who thinks in photos, and you talk about just here taking all these photographs. And but you also seem to think in music and lyrics, and you wrote this book, and it's so, submersed in the Delta in a lot of ways. I've been to some of these places. You've traveled so much. I think a lot of people don't realize how big Mississippi is. It is
I drove
bigger than Pennsylvania.
Drove 3,000 miles in the Delta alone in 1 year.
It's a lot. And so I guess, was this necessary for you, to immerse yourself in this? Or is this the way you write always? Is this so imbued in you that this is kind of what we'll expect in other books from you?
It is very much a part of who I am. I do kind of immerse myself in the topic. I go into it very deeply with the music. I think there's a chapter in Ever Is a Long Time that's called Car Wheels on a Gravel Driveway, because I was listening to Lucinda Williams on repeat while I'm writing that book. And, Lucinda's new album also has a song on there that starts out, "It's Darkness on the Delta." So it's like it's coming back. It's kind of like Lucinda and I are kind of coming back together again. So yeah, music is a big part of it. Imagery is always a big part of it, but also I think it's getting down in an immersive way into the place itself. As I said, I use the landscape as an archival source. I go into the physical archive, but then I don't just look at a building, I look at, a cotton gin, but I also say, okay, well, what's the provenance of that cotton gin? Why is that here? You look at Drew, Mississippi, there are all these cotton gins. I go to the 1935 WPA Guide to Mississippi, and that's one of the things they mention. Drew, Mississippi has more cotton gins than anywhere in America. So then you begin to see, okay, that's why I see things like this. And then that means that this other town is set up another way, or, reading Tennessee Williams and going to the Couture mansion and realizing this is Big Daddy's house. And that there's this connection between fiction and reality. And they're very close in Mississippi. So I think that's so that idea of immersing myself in a place, in its music, culture, by photographing, those are all the things that I do that have kind of, I would say, over the last 25 years have become a part of my practice as a writer. Did I start out that way? No. But I think over the years, that's kind of where it's taken me. And I think this book in particular, all those things that I've been thinking about, that were also part of my work, my years at the Library of Congress, working with the WPA collections, working with archivists there, asking questions of artists. Or one of the people that I got to talk with for this book was someone who's unexpected, that I had no idea had a connection with to this, and that is the photographer Carrie Mae Weems. Her family is photographed by John Vachon, and a photograph that I had used in a book of John Vachon's photographs. And she says, that's the only photograph I have of my family before they were thrown off their land in this plantation in Arkansas and moved to Mississippi to the Delta Cooperative Farm, which eventually became Providence Farm. And I learned that by going into an archive. And there was this collection of photographs of the Delta Cooperative Farm that had been digitized. I said, well, oh, you have that digitized. Who got that digitized? And they said, there's this lady from New York. I said, what's her name? They said, it's Carrie Mae Weems. And my mouth just drops, which leads me to have an hour-long phone conversation with her about those photographs. So it's like it's kind of the archive leading you to this, then kind of, thinking about the landscape itself. It's all connected.
But you also touch on the fact that the South is very small. Most Southerners can connect each other within a few conversations, which I always think is so very cool.
Yeah, well, yeah, that is very true. But I also say that, one of the jokes that my staff, former staff at the Library of Congress, used to say is, Ralph knows how to play the 6 degrees of separation game very well, and that is what Southerners do. It's like, who are you and who are your people? And once you figure out who your people are, then you're thinking, oh, I can do this, I can do that. I never say anything about anyone in Mississippi because I don't know how they're related to them. It's kind of like everybody is connected here. And those connections go deep.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking as you just now, as you're talking about the archive, like I was very interested when I was reading this. There's a part where you say something about archive that I had actually never thought of. And I am a history major, so I don't know how that's excusable. Maybe we should take away my degree, but I'm going to tell you, in the chapter, we thought Mississippi was safer than Arkansas. You write about how writers often use an archive to craft a story, but they don't always reflect on, and I'm going to quote you, the intentions behind the archive's construction and what may have been excluded or left out. And really, until I read that, I had actually not recognized a weakness in my own understanding, which is the role of an archivist, that they themselves are curating a collection. And so the archive is not a full record. It's just the record someone decided to keep. And I hadn't really got that and I'm 52 years old. So I'm just calling myself out as this is not something that I had thought about. And so I was wondering if you can just kind of talk about that understanding and how does that shape, what does that mean for us when we look at history or we look at, if we're either reading a book from someone or we ourselves want to go into the archive and dig something out, how do we factor in the role of the archivist?
Well, you think about the archivist, but you also think about the person who left the archive behind. In this case, this is someone from the Providence Farm and who had really been harmed by the ending of Providence Farm. And there was so much good that they were doing there. And they were, understandably angry about it. And basically they were saying, I'm keeping everything on all of these people who wronged me, because someday someone is going to look at this and make connections. And that is really what and that's what they're doing. And I realize that even with my own personal archive, I'm doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I had a time at the University of Virginia as editor of the Virginia Quarterly Review. It did not end well for me, but I kept all that stuff, and all of that's in my archive. And someone, when that's unleashed, will find that one day, and they will understand things that I want people to understand about that period in my life, and it's intentional. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes someone just kind of dies suddenly, leaves things behind, and everything gets hoovered up and then put together. But in this case, and in my case, I've tightly curated my archive before it goes to the archive. I mean, I'm giving everything on all of my books, all the research, and my personal notebooks too, where I kept notes for this. All that's there. There's some shopping lists in there too, but it's kind of like, but it just there's everything that's there, and you can go through it and you can figure out some things about me along the way, and that's. And after I'm gone, I don't care. I'm worm food at this point.
I'm interested to know how you feel about, you wrote a quote, I think it was, I can't find it in my notes right now, but it was something to the effect of seeing poverty as not keeping tourists away. And I was wondering, because you got a lot of quotes from people you were interviewing about how they felt about that and their thoughts about that. I was wondering how you feel about that. Does that make you feel like Clarksdale is losing its identity, so to speak, its authenticity, as you mentioned earlier, or does it make you feel like it has a fighting chance now?
I think it's both. There are ways that it's losing its identity, like that separation between what was white Clarksdale and black Clarksdale no longer exist. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does kind of keep you from seeing the signs of it. Just like thinking about that stairway at the back of the Paramount Theater, that was the colored entrance, knowing that what that was, and that's telling you, those are signs telling you what existed on that landscape before. So there's that, but then there's also the other side of it, that I see young people in Clarksdale today. I saw this back in May when they had the screening of Sinners, which is set in Clarksdale, but couldn't be filmed in Mississippi because Mississippi didn't give the right financial incentives for it to be filmed in Mississippi. But the young people of Clarksdale, and they were really young people, got together, brought that there. Tyler Yarborough brought that, wrote to Ryan Coogler, brought him there, and all these people associated with the movie. And I saw on display there the future of the Mississippi Delta. I saw these young people who care about this place, who want, believe that of course, no one's coming to save them. We're going to save ourselves. We're going to work hard to do that. If the rest of y'all want to come along, great. You're welcome to come. But so it's both of those things. There is some things that are being lost, but then I see that there's this group of young people who are trying to reclaim what has been lost to create some kind of balance there. So I don't think there's a complete disruption in the force. So
the young, I think, of Mississippi will one day make changes that we can only imagine, in my opinion, after spending enough time down there teaching them. But I wanted to kind of pull back a little bit on, you visited Parchman, which is to me, if you want to talk about the poorest of the poorest places, one of the darkest places in this country. And you came out of that place with a lot of really, I think, important thoughts. And I think like this chapter alone is worth buying this book all on its own, because it's such a fantastic. But I'd like to just say thank you for visiting them, because a lot of people don't visit prisons. Tacitly, when we don't do that, we basically approve of what's happening. So I want to say thank you, because I worked there for 9 years in a county correctional center as a librarian, and it is a hard place. So thank you for visiting them. Thank you for providing that class. But if you could talk a little bit about how that experience of teaching a class in Parchman changed who you are and how you think.
Oh gosh, that I mean, I taught at Parchman before, but I taught in pre-release. I hadn't really, and this time I was in Unit 29, and these are people who are in prison for life. And that was a really different experience. So, and I realized some things. I mean, I think probably the most important thing that I realized was that I think we like to think that people who are incarcerated are different from you and me. And I recognized how closely connected we were. And that's kind of scary when you begin to think about it. And a friend of mine says, well, are you getting too close to people? And you're just thinking, I never ask anyone what they did, but are you getting too close to people who might harm you? And I said, well, I might harm you. It's kind of like, so, I mean, who knows what any of us are capable of doing. We're human beings. And I think that experience really had that impact on me, rather than seeing people there as people who could not be rehabilitated. I saw a lot of room for rehabilitation there that was not happening. I went in to teach thinking I'd get them to write memoir about their time before Parchman, because I was really trying to understand this intersection of poverty and violence. That's what I was trying to do in that class. So I'm teaching at the same time I'm reporting. So it's an interesting mix of things. And what I came to recognize is that I was trying to get them to write memoir, because this life inside Parchman, I couldn't imagine. But that's what they really wanted to write about, because that had shaped them more than what happened before they got there. And that was a recognition for me, is that, I was not being sensitive to what it was that they really needed. And I finally had to confront, here's what they need. I'm trying to give them something that I think they need. But that's typically what happens. We, good liberal people, we come in, we think, we know what you need. And we don't. and kind of recognizing, that I didn't know that, but also realizing how closely I'm connected with them. And I would say that being in Parchman, going to Parchman each week for a year, really did change the way that I look at incarceration and people who are incarcerated, and realizing that the stories that we tell about them have nothing to do with the reality of their lives. That's really it. So that's why I did that. So, again, I felt I had to immerse myself in this place rather than kind of standing outside the walls. Well, they're not really walls. Parchman doesn't have, they're walls within the units, but it's just this big expanse of land, thousands of acres. It's all open. So yes, that's really what it was. And, kind of that quote from the Bible that turns up there, that's everywhere. What was it? Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting these things which are behind, and reaching forth until those things are which are before, which is a somewhat cryptic way of saying, you're never getting out of here. And I thought that is a horrible way to use the Bible to basically send this message to these people who are incarcerated for life. You will never leave here. Or
Well,
this,
and I'm kind of thankful they can't read it. Like I think that in and of itself is its, saving grace is that they won't read it because
well, it's everywhere. So I think they have.
yeah,
And the only degree you can get at Parchman is through the Baptist Theological Seminary in New Orleans. So you can't go in there and get a degree in creative writing. And actually, Louis Bourgeois, who organized the classes that I was teaching there, is no longer allowed to teach that class at Parchman.
Oh,
So that's that's an interesting update to kind of put out there. That and I probably, because I took my camera and documented the cemetery and the outside of that, I will probably never be allowed to go inside Parchman again.
wow.
Yeah.
What a loss.
Yeah. So, I really wanted to see those men. I really wanted to give them a copy of the book, but I don't think I'll ever get the chance to do that.
Mm-hmm. Can we send books to? I mean, a serious question. Can outsiders send books in?
Only paperbacks.
Okay, I'm going to talk to you after.
Yeah. So actually, one of the things I actually need to ask my publisher: do they have leftover galleys? Because I would send galleys too. I can send an uncorrected galley, but I can't send a hardcover book.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I know we've worked with Randall. Do you know Randall Horton?
I know.
Okay, so Randall Horton was did some adjunct at MUW. It's for the creative writing program, and he's somebody who's done a lot of work. He was incarcerated with some felonies and has subsequently gone on. I think he's teaching somewhere. I'm so sorry, I don't remember this right now, but he's a professor. I feel like somewhere in New Jersey, and we've had him for some events. But he does work with getting books to people who are incarcerated, and does, again, poetry work. A lot of the work that you were doing in Parchman, he has done in other places. And I'll after this is done, I'll send you an email.
They published a prison version, so it's a paperback that can be produced and distributed. And one of the things that he does is put books. So yeah, we should get you connected.
That'd be great.
Okay. I just want to take a moment, if I can, and talk about the organization of the book. And I felt, as I was thinking about this, a little bit like when I was a student and feeling like, oh, what if I've misunderstood? But I'm going to tell you what, I got about halfway through the book and I was like, oh, I feel like I see this organization and I want to talk about it. So that was amazing. Which is, so Ellen Ann Fentress taught, when I took classes from her, she talked about when you're doing memoir, that you need something that you can get into the story on, right? Like a focal point, and then that leads you into the story. And so as I was reading this, I felt like what I was seeing was, we traveled around the Delta visiting different towns. And by visiting different towns, each town then became a lens through which we would see an issue. So for instance, Drew, and we get into schools. And so first of all, did I understand correctly how this book was organized?
That is exactly the way that I was trying to do that. I was trying to start at the bottom of the Delta in Milestone, because Holmes County is a county that is divided between hills and Delta, and so come from that Delta side of Holmes County, all the way up through the Delta, up to Tunica, kind of the end of the Delta. Although famously they say that the lobby of the Peabody Hotel is where the Delta begins. I don't exactly buy that. And actually, David Cohn, who wrote that, he was just kind of being poetic. He didn't really believe that either. But that quote is the one that has been taken from that book and used the most. So I don't even see it that way. But that's what I was trying to do, is trying to take you on that trip through the Delta, once again, breaking through that mythology that it's the Peabody Hotel, and really it's Tunica, where there are all these places that are trying to be like the Peabody are there, except they have slot machines and they reek of cigarette smoke. So it's kind of like, kind of going into those places and realizing, it's almost like you're trying to bring the Peabody to the Delta, but it doesn't quite work. So yeah, that was really what I was thinking about. I'm trying to take you on. I wanted you to take you by the hand and say, come on a little trip with me.
Yeah. Yeah. I really had that feeling. And it was like with a place like Mississippi too, right? Where it was like very much, and a place like Mississippi really is like, we are traveling with you. I actually, after I read A Place Like Mississippi, I think I said this to you. I was like, I actually want to go and actually take the tour with you, like in your car, but I felt like you had this here too, where we get to understand the towns, but that the issues or the systemic forces that are working, or that are at play in the Delta, yes, we're looking at this one in this town, but they are pervasive across the area.
That's really what I was trying to do. I was trying to take you on this trip through the Delta, and to understand, what this place is all about, to kind of get beyond the mythology of the place.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so for people who are watching, we're here, as you know, we're here in Prince George's County. We have viewers really from all over the region. And we're talking about Mississippi. We're talking about this book and this deep dive, and we're talking about systemic issues. And we have, there's a lot of things we haven't even had the chance to touch on yet, and hopefully we'll have enough time. But it's what does it mean to somebody in Washington, D.C., or somebody in Laurel, Maryland, or, in Arkansas, who picks up this book and the stories that it tells? Can you talk about what this matters to the nation?
Well, I the big example that I use is that, think about, if any of you are familiar with the work of the photographer LaToya Ruby Frazier, who documents Western Pennsylvania and this kind of rusting infrastructure of the industrial Midwest. And you see where there's just this detritus of this, life that was lived there, or the system that kept this place alive, or that extracted things from people there. And she's documented that all. And she says, when I look at photographs of Braddock and I visit other places, I'm thinking that place is like Braddock. And I do the same thing. I go around other parts of the country and I see the Mississippi Delta. And I think we don't make those connections nearly enough between the inequalities of one place, or seeing, I think probably the big thing for people in Washington, in the Washington region, is if you study the Mississippi Delta closely, you begin to see the roots of American income inequality, how it all started with the way that, we fought a war in the war on poverty. I lived in Washington, D.C. during the Reagan years. And I remember that whole attack on, Ronald Reagan famously said we fought a war on poverty and poverty won. And that's not the case at all. But we've come to accept that as received narrative. But what we don't know is that really, Johnson fights this war on poverty. You have people in Mississippi like James Eastland, John Stennis, and Jamie Whitten, who are fighting a war in the war on poverty. They're from the South, but the way they're fighting this in the South gets into national policy and has an impact nationally, which then kind of ricochets into Nixon's new federalism that comes about. Then we have Ronald Reagan's really push on market forces in the 1980s. And then we have Bill Clinton's welfare reform, which sends all this tumbling back to the states. And they get to do what they want with this money. Look at what Mississippi has done with its TANF money. They've funded all kinds of things that don't help poor people. Yet only 4% of the people in the poorest region of the country get cash welfare benefits, because we've made it so difficult for them. So that's the impact that it's had. What you see there is the impact of national policy. It's not policies that were decided in the South, but the people who were politicians in the South had this power to affect things nationally. And that's the thing that we often ignore, and we ignore at our peril, how what happens in one part of the country affects the rest of it. Because if we all want to be honest right now, we are all living with one foot in the South right now. And, look at what is happening in Minneapolis. It's a mirror to Birmingham in the 60s. ICE is no better than Bull Connor. Let's just call it like it is. And history doesn't echo, it rhymes. And we don't see how it rhymes all the time. And that is the same thing with the Delta. We don't see that connection with the rest of the country. And that's one of the reasons that I felt I needed to write this book, is I wanted people to begin to see the connections between this place, so they think they can just write off, or even write the people off, because of course everything that's happened there is their fault, because that's what we have done with poor people. We say that that poverty is a part of personal failing, and it's not. And when we begin to rethink that, we begin to see things differently. It's like I say, to change what you see, you have to change what you know. And a lot of people are not, we have to be willing to change what we know about these places. And that's really what I want people who live in Washington, who live in New York, who live in Boston, but won't go to Roxbury, to begin to see.
Yeah, I would say Stacey Abrams in Georgia has started picking away at some of that. And I think we're seeing some of the change is going to come kind of mentality in some areas of the South. But I guess when we talk about it's taking a Moses to change the Delta, because do you think it's going to happen? Does it have to happen grassroots like it is kind of happening in Georgia? Because like one of the things my parents always said was that Robert Kennedy's assassination for them was devastating. And I never really understood it really until I read this part of your book, and I called my parents up this weekend and we had this big long conversation. My dad said he saw all of America. And I felt that in your book that Kennedy's visit to Mississippi was like, he saw those people. He didn't just see them, but he saw them. And I don't know how else to say that, but do you think we're going to see that in this generation? Or have we seen the chance go by?
I think we're going to see that in this generation. It's interesting. Michael Harrington had this book called The Other America, and there's a book about Robert Kennedy saying that he was the president of the other America, and I think that's very true. And we haven't had someone who has spoken about poverty as passionately as we have had since Robert Kennedy. I know someone who interviewed me said, well, there are other people who have really talked about poverty. I said, yes. I said, I would agree, there are, but it was central to the way that he thought about policy. And I want to be clear, I don't think Robert Kennedy was a saint. He was a politician, and he was a very crafty politician at that. So I'm looking at this very clearly, but we haven't had someone who saw that as central to the way that we move forward as a nation since Robert Kennedy. And I'm afraid we won't see that again. We may see that with this generation who's experiencing the ways that inequality has affected them. But that's why, a lot of people are very, dismissive of this generation, and I can be too. I teach young people. I had, the use of AI in my class last spring was really troubling to me. But this fall, I taught a class where students had to use the archive, and no one used AI. And they said holding those old pieces of paper in my hand really changed me and made me begin to think about what it is that I really value. And I thought, this is what we need to have young people do. You get them into the archive and they begin to connect with this past, and having them recognize not everything can be found on Google. It can't be. Go into the archive. That's where the stuff is. And so I saw that with this group of young people last semester, and it really gave me hope. It really did.
So we have time for like a very brief question, and so I'm going to put you on the hot seat a little bit and say, okay. So at the Office of Human Rights, we do try to give people like a takeaway, right? You've been here, you've listened to the program, you've heard it's starting to touch on some of these systemic things. What is a Oh, actually, I have a question from a viewer. Let me sneak that in really quick, and then I'm going to ask you for a takeaway for viewers to think like an action item kind of that you would want people to do. Here's a question from the viewer, though. It just came in. I'm so glad it got here before we closed. Mr. Eubanks, do you think your book is appropriate for an incoming 6th grader? My son is listening with me, and he's very interested in how Birmingham's history is being repeated in Minneapolis.
Gosh, I'm thinking about myself as a 6th grader. You know, I was kind of weird 6th grader, though. I would say yes. I think a 6th grader could really engage with this book, a very sophisticated 6th grader. So yes, I do think that's, and I hope that he will read it. And I hope kind of maybe reading a little bit of civil rights history will also get them to begin to see the connections between what's happening in Minneapolis right now.
I'll just jump in as a librarian in this situation that it is always important to read with your children. And so if you're not sure about, you know, whether or not they'd understand the words or anything, that's what you could come in, and you reading it together, I think would be a really great exercise in learning for both of you. So I'll leave that and go ahead.
I'm glad for the librarian's voice here. It's really important. You know, I was the dad who said, anything on that bookshelf you can read. You can't watch anything, but you can read it. So that was the rule at my house. So I remember, you know, my son saying, well, you've got this book by Hans Kung, Does God Exist? Can I read that? Absolutely. If you think you can read Hans Kung, you go right ahead. Now, did he finish it? No, but he did start it. So.
Oh, and here's that you have an answer. Thank you. He's twice exceptional, so we'll be doing it together. Okay, that's awesome. That's a great. I'm glad that came in. So I don't know. Do you want to tackle just like, is there a takeaway that you'd like people to have?
I would say the big takeaway I would want people to have is when we talk about the South, or we talk about books about the South, we're not just talking about the region, we're talking about the nation. And we have to begin to think in those terms, especially now that so much of the South of the past, I would say even the idea of the antebellum South is really coming back in this administration. That we have to begin to, if you understand the South, you can understand the nation. And that is why I would say reading books like mine about the South, that's the takeaway I want people to have. It's not that, you know, that you have to, I think we have ignored the South at our peril. And I think that is where, you know, so much of why we are where we are today is because we've not done that. So that would be the takeaway that I want people to have.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. We are unfortunately out of time. Ralph, it has been so awesome to have you back. It's just a privilege. Thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, it's been great being with you. So thank you for having me today.
For everyone watching, thank you for tuning in, whether you're watching live or tuning in on demand later. We really appreciate the fact that you've chosen to spend your time with us. You are why we do what we do. And the very best way that you can support Ralph is by reading his books. So you can buy When It's Darkness on the Delta or any of his other books at your favorite independent bookstore. And if you're not in a position to buy right now, please get them from your local library system. If your local library system doesn't have the book and you'd like them to get it, ask them to get it for you. We hope to see you at some of our upcoming events soon, like next week for Lunch and Learn. We welcome Danny Funt in conversation about his book, Everybody Loses, The Tumultuous Rise of American Sports Gambling. You can learn more about that and other programs at civilrights.mypgc.us. And please check out our friends at the library at pgcmls.info/events to see the many things that they do for you every single day. Ralph, again, thank you. I love the book, and it's really always such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you.
Bye, everybody.